The sun was just rising over the busy town of Ikundu when Nia stood quietly at the edge of the dusty bus station, holding her small, worn-out suitcase. Around her, her relatives forced smiles, clapping her shoulders and saying, "This is your big chance, Nia." But deep inside, she knew the truth. This was not about opportunity, it was about survival. They were sending her far away, not to study or chase dreams, but to work as a maid in a stranger's house. Her heart pounded as she looked at their faces. None of them noticed the way her hands trembled. Her aunt spoke loudly, praising how lucky she was, but Nia could see the relief in their eyes. To them, sending her away meant one less mouth to feed. She tried to smile back, but her lips quivered. Her little sister Amira tugged at her dress, eyes already wet. "Don't forget us, Nia," she whispered. Those words broke her heart more than anything. As the bus engine roared to life, Nia climbed aboard, clutching her suitcase like it was all she had left. Through the window, she waved one last time, her tears blurring the faces of the family that was letting her go. Deep inside, a silent fear grew. Would they even remember her after today? "Do you want me to continue writing the next scene too?" A sister's silent tears. In the same style and flow, so it all reads like one continuous emotional story? Amira was only 12, but in that moment, she held Nia like a mother afraid to lose her child. Her small arms wrapped tightly around her sister's waist, refusing to let go, as if she could somehow stop the bus from taking her away. Her face pressed against Nia's dress, and her tears soaked through the fabric. "Don't forget us, Nia," she whispered, her voice breaking like a fragile glass. Nia bent down and cupped Amira's face in her hands. Her own tears were falling, but she tried to smile for her little sister. "I could never forget you," she said softly. "No matter where I go, you'll always be here." She placed Amira's hand on her heart, "Right inside me." But her voice trembled and deep down fear gnawed at her. She didn't know when or if she would come back. Around them, the relatives shifted impatiently, some pretending to be cheerful, others already turning their eyes away. To them, this was just another goodbye, a practical decision. But for Nia and Amira, it felt like their world was being torn apart. Amira's small shoulders shook as she cried harder. "What if they don't treat you well?" she asked, her words muffled by sobs. Nia kissed her forehead, forcing courage she didn't feel. "Then I'll be strong," she said. "For you. For us." She wanted to believe her own words, but the truth was she was terrified. The thought of scrubbing floors in a strange country, of sleeping in rooms where no one cared if she cried. She pushed it aside, not wanting Amira to see her weakness. When the bus horn blared, Amira clung tighter, screaming, "Don't go!" Her cry pierced through the noise of the station, and for a second, Nia almost dropped her suitcase and ran. But the driver shouted, and her aunt pulled Amira back. With one last desperate look, Nia stepped onto the bus. From the window, she saw Amira collapse into tears, her small hands covering her face. That image burned itself into Nia's heart, a wound that would never fully heal. "Would you like me to carry this?" The moment Nia stepped off the plane, the air felt different, colder, heavier, almost unfriendly. She carried the hope that maybe, just maybe, her family had been right. Maybe life here would be better. But that hope didn't last long. At the airport, a stern woman with sharp eyes and rushed footsteps came to collect her. There was no warmth in her voice, no smile of welcome, just a quick look over Nia like she was cargo. The house she was taken to was large, shining, and filled with expensive furniture. For a brief second, Nia thought, maybe this is where my new life begins. But within hours, the truth revealed itself. The woman handed her a list of chores that stretched endlessly. Scrub the floors until they shone, wash piles of clothes, polish glass tables, cook meals she had never even tasted before. There was no kindness, no training, no patience. She was expected to work like a machine. By nightfall, her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. She asked where she could sleep, hoping for at least a small bed to rest on. The woman pointed toward a narrow door at the back of the house. Inside was not a bedroom but a cramped storage room, filled with old boxes, cleaning supplies, and dust. A thin mattress was laid on the floor, no sheets, no pillow. That was her room. As Nia lay down that first night, the cold from the concrete floor seeped into her bones. She stared at the ceiling, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. She remembered Amira's last words, "Don't forget us," and felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest. The dream her family painted of opportunity and comfort was nothing but a lie. She was not here as a guest. She was here as a servant. Still, somewhere deep inside her, a small voice whispered, "Endure. This is not the end." But in that moment, with her body broken and her heart aching, it was hard to believe. Do you want me to expand scene 4? Nights of Loneliness, 350 to 400 words. In the same deep emotional St. Every night, when the house finally grew silent and the lights were switched off, Nia retreated to her small storage room. The mattress on the floor was so thin that the hardness of the concrete pressed into her back. She would turn from side to side, but no position brought comfort. Her muscles burned from scrubbing floors, her hands were raw from endless washing, and her eyelids felt heavy, but sleep never came easily. She stared at the cracked ceiling above her, listening to the distant hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock in the hallway. Those sounds became her lullaby, reminding her that she was in a house full of people, yet completely alone. Sometimes she pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm the pounding ache inside. It wasn't just her body that hurt, it was her heart. Her mind went back to Ikundu, to the dusty station where Amira cried out for her not to go. She could still see her little sister's face stained with tears. Nia whispered her name in the dark, as though somehow Amira could hear her across the miles. That memory cut deeper than any harsh word from her employer. Because no matter how cruel the work was, what hurt most was knowing her own family had let her go. They had chosen survival over her, trading her youth for their comfort. Some nights, Nia cried quietly into her pillow, covering her mouth so no one would hear. Other nights she lay still, letting the silence swallow her pain. She wondered if anyone back home thought of her, if Amira still missed her, or if her family had already moved on. The loneliness was heavy, like chains wrapped around her soul. Yet in those darkest hours, Nia would whisper to herself, one day this will change." Her voice was shaky, but those words were the only light she had in the deep tunnel of her nights. It was hope, fragile but alive, that kept her from breaking completely. Do you want me to carry this same emotional flow into scene 5? A spark of hope, 350 to 400 W. One afternoon, as Nia scrubbed the tiles on the porch, her back bent and her hands soaked in soapy water, she heard two neighbors talking on the other side of the fence. Their voices carried clearly, laughing and sharing news. She barely paid attention at first, until one sentence caught her ear. "They've started free evening classes for immigrants. English, computers, even business skills, can you believe it?" Nia froze, her sponge still in her hand. Free classes? For people like her? She leaned closer, pretending to rinse the bucket, but her heart was racing. The women continued chatting, not knowing that their casual words had just lit a small fire in the heart of the girl scrubbing the floor. That night, when everyone in the house was asleep, Nia lay on her thin mattress with her eyes wide open. She stared at the ceiling, her mind turning the words over and over again. Classes. Learning. A chance. Slowly, she whispered to herself in the dark, "If I don't fight for myself, no one will." Her voice was barely audible, but to her it felt like a promise. The thought frightened her as much as it excited her. Could she even manage it? After long hours of work, she could barely stand, let alone sit in a classroom. And what if her employers found out? They might punish her or worse, send her back in disgrace. Still, the idea refused to leave her mind. For the first time in years, Nia felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to feel in a long while: hope. It wasn't big, it wasn't loud, but it was enough to remind her that her story didn't have to end as a servant. Maybe, just maybe, this was the door she had been waiting for. She closed her eyes that night, clutching her pillow as if it were a shield, and whispered again, "I will fight for myself." And for the first time in a long time, sleep came with a tiny smile. Do you want me to move ahead with scene 6? Learning in secret, 350 to 400 words. Showing how she sneaks to classes despite her exhaustion? Every evening, after finishing endless chores, Nia would wait until the house grew quiet. She made sure the dishes were stacked, the floors were spotless, and the laundry was folded neatly. Then, with her heart pounding, she would slip out through the back gate. The streets were dimly lit, the air chilly, but her steps carried a secret determination. She walked quickly, afraid someone from the household might notice her absence, until she reached a small community center where the free classes were held. Inside, she found people just like her. Men and women from different countries, all carrying stories of struggle. The classroom wasn't fancy. The chairs were old and the blackboard was cracked, but to Nia it felt like stepping into another world. A world where she wasn't just the maid, but a student, a dreamer, someone with a future. First she struggled. English words twisted on her tongue. Her hands shook on the keyboard as she learned to type. Many nights her eyelids grew so heavy she thought she might collapse on the desk. But still she stayed. She repeated words again and again until her accent grew softer. She typed slowly until her fingers found rhythm. She copied notes carefully, even when her back ached from hours of scrubbing floors. Every little improvement felt like a victory. When she managed to write her first short sentence in English, she smiled so wide the teacher noticed. When she typed her name without looking at the keyboard, she almost cried. These small wins gave her the strength to keep going. Her body grew weaker with exhaustion, but her spirit grew stronger with knowledge. Each lesson planted new seeds of confidence inside her. She began to imagine possibilities, jobs beyond cleaning, dreams beyond survival. Walking back home late at night, her feet dragging on the pavement, she whispered to herself, "I'm not just a maid. I'm becoming more." Though no one in that house knew what she was doing, Nia carried a secret pride. For the F. One Saturday afternoon, Nia walked into the public library, her bag heavy with notebooks. She had discovered that the library offered free internet and endless books, and it quickly became her safe place. There no one saw her as a maid. She was just another young woman searching for knowledge. She would sit quietly in the corner, typing practice letters on an old computer or reading simple English storybooks like they were treasures. That was where she first met Kwame. He was a tall Ghanaian man in his 40s, dressed neatly but with a humble air about him. He noticed Nia struggling with a computer, her fingers pressing the wrong keys over and over. Instead of laughing or ignoring her, he leaned closer and said kindly, "May I show you a trick?" His tone carried patience, something Nia hadn't felt in a long time. She hesitated at first, nervous around strangers, but there was something gentle in his eyes. Slowly she nodded. Kwame sat beside her, showing her shortcuts, correcting her typing posture, and explaining things in simple words. For the first time Nia didn't feel stupid, she felt capable. When she looked up to thank him, he saw more than a maid in worn-out clothes. He saw determination burning through her tired eyes. Over the weeks, they began to meet often in that same library. Sometimes he brought her books on business basics, sometimes he shared his own story of starting small and building a company. "You are not limited to where you started, Nia," he told her one evening, his voice firm but kind. "Your spirit is stronger than your situation. I can see it." Those words sank deep into her heart. For years, she had carried her fight alone, doubting herself in silence. But here was someone who believed in her without question. For the first time since leaving home, she felt seen. She walked back to her storage room that night with a strange new feeling, a quiet, steady confidence rising inside her. "Would you like me to move ahead with Scene 8 Rising S?" With Kwame's steady guidance, Nia began to see possibilities she had never dared to imagine. He encouraged her to apply for small jobs outside of housework, reminding her that her classes and late-night efforts had prepared her more than she realized. First she was terrified. Who would hire a maid with broken English and no experience? But Kwame's belief in her was stronger than her fear. One morning, dressed in her only clean blouse and a borrowed skirt, Nia walked into a small office that was looking for a receptionist. Her hands shook as she filled out the form, her heart racing as the manager asked her simple questions. For every word she stumbled on, she remembered her nights in class, practicing again and again. Somehow she made it through. A week later she received the call. She was hired. That first day at the desk, answering phones and greeting visitors, Nia felt a rush of pride. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was small, but it was hers. It was honest work where no one shouted at her, no one treated her like furniture, and at the end of the day she went home with dignity. From then on, every coin she earned was guarded like treasure. She cut every unnecessary expense, packing simple meals, walking long distances to save transport money, and writing down each dollar in a notebook Kwame had given her. Whenever she felt tired, she looked at those numbers adding up and whispered, "This is my freedom fund." At night, as she laid her head on her thin mattress, the pain of her maid days slowly began to fade. For the first time she could see a door opening. She was no longer trapped in a cycle of endless scrubbing and silence. She was rising slowly but surely, one step at a time. Would you like me to continue with Scene 9? Building something new, 350 to 400 words. Where she finally starts her own small business. Years passed, and the girl who once scrubbed floors in silence began to build a new chapter of her life. Nia had saved carefully, coin by coin, until her notebook of numbers became enough to take a risk. With Kwame's encouragement, she registered a small cleaning service. It felt strange at first, standing on the other side, no longer the servant but the one giving out jobs. Her first clients were small offices and apartments, people who needed extra hands for daily cleaning. Nia worked alongside her team, wearing gloves, carrying buckets, and showing them she was not above the work. But there was one big difference between her and the employers she had once served. She treated her workers like human beings. She gave them fair pay, proper breaks, and kind words. If someone was sick, she gave them rest. If someone looked tired, she offered encouragement instead of insults. Her workers began to admire her, not just as a boss, but as a leader who understood their struggles. Many whispered, "She is different. She knows our pain." And indeed she did. Every harsh word she had endured, every night she had slept on a thin mattress, had shaped her heart. She refused to let anyone under her feel the same despair. Slowly her business grew. Clients noticed not just the cleanliness of their spaces, but the honesty and warmth of her company. Word spread. New contracts came in. Nia reinvested every profit into uniforms, better tools, and training for her staff. She watched her workers stand taller, with pride in their jobs, because they were respected. Sometimes when she walked into her small office and saw her employees laughing together during a break, her eyes filled with tears. This was more than business, it was healing. By giving others the dignity she once lost, she was rebuilding her own soul. Would you like me to move forward with Scene 10? Expanding the dream, 350 to 400 words. Where her little company begins to flourish into something much bigger. What began as a tiny cleaning service slowly grew into something much bigger than Nia ever imagined. At first, she handled just one or two small contracts, juggling schedules and working late into the night to make sure everything was perfect. But soon, her dedication and honesty began to speak louder than any advertisement. Clients told others about her company, praising how reliable and professional her team was. One opportunity opened the door to another, and before long, she was no longer managing just apartments and small offices. She was cleaning entire office buildings and later even hotels. Nia could hardly believe it sometimes. She would walk into a gleaming hotel lobby, see her team in crisp uniforms working with pride, and remember the nights she herself had scrubbed floors until her knees bruised. Now she wasn't just cleaning for survival. She was running an empire built on respect. People admired her leadership, her calm way of solving problems, her fairness in business deals. They saw the confident woman in elegant attire, taking meetings with managers and signing contracts. What they didn't see was the girl who once cried herself to sleep on a thin mattress in a dusty storage room. That part of her story remained hidden, but it lived quietly in her heart as a reminder never to forget where she came from. Her employees often said she carried a special light, something different that made them feel safe under her guidance. They didn't know that the light was born from pain, shaped by rejection, and fueled by a promise Nia once whispered to herself, "If I don't fight for myself, no one will." As her company spread across cities, people began to call her a role model. They admired her success but never guessed the depth of the journey behind it. Only Nia knew the cost of the dream she was now living. Would you like me to carry this flow into Scene 11? The decision to return, 350 to 400 words. Where Nia finally decides to go back home after 8 long years. 8 long years had passed since Nia waved goodbye to her little sister at the bus station in Ikundu. 8 years of sleepless nights, hard work, and battles nobody knew about. Now she stood in her spacious office, the sound of phones ringing and staff moving around her, and felt a deep pull in her heart. She had built a life in this foreign land, a life filled with dignity and success, but something inside whispered, it was time to go home. That evening, she opened her laptop and booked a plane ticket. Her hands trembled as she clicked confirm. It felt unreal. The last time she had traveled, she carried a worn-out bag, fear in her heart and tears in her eyes. This time she was returning with something far greater than money. She was returning with her head held high, her soul unbroken, and her dreams fulfilled. The days leading to her trip were filled with memories. She thought of Amira's tear-stained face, the way her sister begged her not to forget them. She remembered the storage room where she once cried alone, the nights of hunger, the whispers of hope that kept her alive. Each memory hurt, but it also reminded her how far she had come. On the morning of her departure, she packed her luggage carefully, elegant dresses, gifts for her family, and documents that spoke of her achievements. She slipped on a modern Ankara gown with golden details, a symbol of both her roots and her triumph. Standing in front of the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She was no longer the girl sent away to scrub floors. She was a woman of power, grace, and resilience. As she wheeled her suitcase toward the airport, a smile spread across her face. This was not just a journey home. It was a return written by destiny. Shall I continue with Scene 12? The arrival at Ikundu, 350 to 400 words, where her dramatic homecoming takes everyone by surprise. The airport in Ikundu buzzed with noise, families reuniting, children running to embrace parents, luggage carts rattling across the floor. Among the crowd stood Nia's relatives waiting anxiously. Some whispered to each other, wondering how she would look after so many years abroad. In their minds, they pictured the same timid girl who had left with a worn-out suitcase and tears in her eyes. None of them were prepared for what they were about to see. Then the sliding doors opened and Nia stepped out. She moved with quiet confidence, her head held high, her smile calm yet commanding. She wore a flowing modern Ankara gown with gold details that shimmered under the airport lights. The gown hugged her gracefully, the colors bold yet elegant. Her hair was styled beautifully, and around her neck glistened a simple gold chain. Nothing flashy, just dignified. She rolled a sleek suitcase beside her, and behind her trailed an assistant carrying more bags. For a moment, silence fell over her waiting family. Their mouths opened in shock and their eyes widened. Was this really the same Nia they had once sent away to scrub floors? The girl who left trembling was gone. In her place stood a woman who radiated strength and power. She was unrecognizable, almost like royalty walking into an ordinary space. Amira's eyes filled with tears instantly. She recognized her sister, not by the gown or the wealth, but by the smile that reached her eyes. She broke into a run, weaving through the crowd, and threw herself into Nia's arms. The two sisters held each other tightly, their tears flowing freely, while the rest of the family stood frozen, their shame heavy in their silence. People around the arrivals gate began to notice the scene, whispering about the woman in the golden Ankara gown who had returned home like a queen. Nia had come back not with bitterness, but with a presence that made the whole airport stop and stare. Do you want me to move on with Scene 13? The family's shame, 350. The relatives who had once waved her off at the dusty station now stood frozen at the airport, unable to move or even speak. Their eyes darted from Nia's elegant gown to the assistant behind her carrying bags, then to the sleek black car waiting outside with a driver holding the door open. It was too much for them to take in. Memories hit them all at once. They remembered the day they packed her off with a tiny suitcase, telling her it was for the good of the family, though deep down they knew they were sending her away as a servant. They had spoken of opportunity, but in truth, they had washed their hands of her. And now, the girl they once dismissed had returned more powerful, more radiant, and more successful than anyone among them. Whispers rippled through the group. Her aunt, who once scolded her harshly, now bit her lip and lowered her eyes. An uncle who had laughed at her tears shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his shirt collar. None of them could find the courage to step forward. They were drowning in their own shame, caught between guilt and disbelief. It was Amira who broke the heavy silence, still clinging to her sister's arm as though she would never let go again. "Look at her," she said softly, pride shining in her eyes. "This is my sister." Her voice carried both joy and quiet defiance, as though she wanted the whole family to see the truth. They had abandoned Nia, but she had risen higher than them all. The relatives forced awkward smiles, but their eyes told the real story. They were humbled, even embarrassed, in the presence of the woman they had once treated as a burden. The shame clung to them like a shadow, while Nia stood calm and graceful, her spirit untouchable. Would you like me to continue with Scene 14? Her gentle triumph, 350 to 400 words, where Nia responds not with anger but with grace, leaving everyone stunned? Nia looked around at the faces of her relatives, each one frozen with guilt. For a moment the weight of the past pressed against her chest, the nights of loneliness, the cruel words, the way they had let her go so easily. She could have let bitterness spill out. She could have reminded them of every tear she had cried. But instead, her eyes softened as she turned to the one person who had never let her down, Amira. She opened her arms wide, and Amira rushed into them. The sisters held each other tightly, their tears flowing, their hearts beating as one after 8 long years apart. The crowd around them watched silently, moved by the rawness of the reunion. Nia whispered into her sister's ear, "You are the reason I kept going. I carried your face in my heart every night." Amira sobbed harder, clinging to her as though she feared she might vanish again. When Nia finally turned to face the rest of the family, her expression was calm, her smile gentle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse them. She simply said in a tone that carried both strength and forgiveness, "Thank you for pushing me away. That rejection became my blessing." Her words cut deeper than anger ever could. The relatives lowered their heads, unable to meet her eyes. Some shifted awkwardly, some wiped silent tears, but none dared to speak. They had expected resentment, maybe even revenge, but instead she had given them grace. Nia walked past them with quiet dignity, her head high, her sister's hand in hers. In that moment it was clear. Her triumph wasn't just in her wealth or success. Her real victory was the strength to forgive, to rise above pain, and to turn rejection into power. Would you like me to close the story with scene 15? The story that spread everywhere, 350 to 400 words, showing how her return became an inspiring tale across nations? Soon, the story of Nia's return spread like wildfire. From the streets of Ikundu to the busy cities of Lagos and Abuja, people whispered about the young girl once sent away as a maid who came back shining like a queen. Her photos at the airport, dressed in her graceful Ankara gown, stepping out of a luxury car, flooded social media. Headlines called her the maid who became a queen. Strangers who had never met her felt connected to her pain and her victory. Mothers told their daughters about her strength. Fathers reminded their children that rejection is not the end. Young girls who once felt forgotten looked at Nia and believed that they too could rise. What made her story even more powerful was not just her wealth, but her heart. She did not return with anger or revenge. She came back with dignity, forgiveness, and proof that dreams can grow even from broken soil. She became more than a woman. She became a symbol of resilience, a living reminder that pain can be the very ground where destiny blossoms. Across Nigeria and beyond, people repeated her name with pride. They saw in her the truth that no rejection can bury a determined spirit. Nia's life became a shining message. Sometimes the stone that is thrown away becomes the foundation of a palace. Would you like me to also write a final short epilogue, 200 words, that leaves the readers with a lasting emotional punch, almost like a closing scene of a movie?